Today I have a new sketch set for you that will help you use up your 12 by 12 paper and not make any new scraps. Hey, it's Beth. Welcome. Today is the Bringing Back Basic Gray collaboration and also an introduction to a brand new No Scraps sketch set. So Bringing Back Basic Gray is a collaboration I do with my friend Sarah, who's crafting and relaxing here on YouTube. And Basic Gray made paper back in the early 2000s, no longer makes paper, switched to fabric. So now those of us who love Basic Gray have kind of been hoarding it over the years. So each month we bring some out of our stash and just enjoy it and have some fun with it. So today I have two sheets from the Boxer collection. This one is Pocket Watch and then Slim Fit. So I'm going to be using that for my cards today. And then Sarah will be linked in the description box below for you so you can go and check out her Basic Gray projects as well. And then I have a new No Scraps sketch set for 12 by 12 paper. This is my 20th sketch set. Woo, I'm excited about that. And this one, it takes 2 sheets of 12 by 12 paper and it turns it into 12 A2 size cards. So on the sketch set, I have the cutting guide that tells you, all the sizes you need to cut down the pieces, gives you labels as to the card sketch it's going to go to, like letter labels as to which sketch it's going to go on. And then I also give you arrows showing you which direction the pieces are going to go on the cards. Just give you some additional notes down here. And then on the back side, I have 3 different sketches and you will make 4 of each to make your 12 cards. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the card making. Starting with the cutting guide, I'm going to be starting my cutting with this top strip that is like 4 1/4 inches wide because it is a place that cuts all the way through the pattern paper. So once I get that initial 4 1/4 inch strip cut, I'm going to cut down those individual pieces. And then I'm going to use a pencil. Since my paper is single-sided, I am going to add a label to the back with the letter of the card sketch that it goes with. This just helps me kind of keep everything organized. So the next line that goes all the way through the pattern paper is that 1 inch strip at the very bottom. So I will go ahead and cut it down, get those labeled. Basically, when I'm using a cutting guide, I always look for the places that cut all the way through the paper. I'll start with the one that cuts the biggest section off and then look for the next place that goes all the way through and then the next and so on. So here, the next section that I can cut all the way through on is this 3 1/2 inch chunk on the right hand side. I'm going to cut that down. And this does have a little extra piece. So when I'm labeling, I am not going to label that. I'm just going to set that aside. This can be used on the inside of the cards or as an extra on the front of the card or whatever. The next section that goes all the way through is the strip with the letter C for the 2 by 4 1/4 inch pieces. And then that just leaves me with that kind of middle chunk that is 4 1/4 or 4 3/4 inches wide. So this is, we will be cutting 2 sheets of pattern paper the exact same way. So this is the first one, and I'll go ahead and do the second one with you, but I'm not going to it's going to be the same process, the same format. So while I'm cutting down the second sheet, I wanted to let you know that my sketch set is a PDF. It is free. The link will be in the description box below where you can click on the link. It'll take you to the page. You can download it and either print it or save it, digitally from there. And my sketch sets are ways to help you use your paper efficiently and effectively and not create any additional scraps. So they are great for beginning card makers who may not have a ton of supplies and want to make the most of their paper. They are also great for experienced card makers who maybe are trying to work through their stash and want a quick way to, use up their paper and put it to good use. So my sketch sets, they have
sketches, card sketches included that are kind of basic, but you can take those and, if you're a beginning card maker who doesn't have a lot of supplies, these basic card sketches are great because you don't necessarily need a ton of extra items other than maybe your card base and some pattern paper and maybe sentiments. If you are an experienced card maker, you can build off of those card sketches and make them, as detailed, as embellished as you want. So it's kind of like I start with a basic sketch just so that it can be more versatile. So just wanted to throw that out there. Now that all of my pieces are cut, I can start assembling. So starting with sketch A, I'm going to do 2 different variations with you. The first card for each sketch is just going to be exactly as it's shown on my sketch sheet. And then the second variation will have some matting layers just so you can see the difference and maybe see, how I would do the matting layers. So for sketch A, for this first card, I'm simply putting that kind of reddish pattern down directly onto my card base. I am using off-white card bases. They are 110-pound cardstock, so nice and sturdy. And then I just put that strip down. I do have a bird that I die cut out of some scrap blue cardstock, and then I also used a scalloped oval die to go behind the bird. The sentiment didn't stand out very much, and so I wanted to, since it was kind of on a light background for most of it, I decided to bring in a kind of navy blue marker. Any type of marker will do, just to add a little ink to the edges to help the sentiment stand out a little bit more. And then I will go ahead and adhere all of these down. And the sentiment, I have a heart on the sketch. It can be any shape, like I've got an oval here. You could do circle. You could just do a floral. It doesn't even have to have a specific geometric shape tied to it. It could be any type of embellishment that you want to put there. I could have just done the bird, but I wanted the bird to kind of stand out a little bit more. And my sentiment says, "Sending you warm hugs," for this one. So for the next variation on sketch A, I have a card mat that is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And so I trimmed that square piece down so that it will fit the card mat. It's meant to go, across the card as if you didn't have a mat, but I wanted it to fit my mat, so I did have to trim 1/8 of an inch off. So I will go ahead and put that down. And then the other pattern that going on that strip that's going to go vertically, I did create a mat for it out of some off-white cardstock. Usually when I do matting layers that aren't a card mat, I go 1/4 inch. I add 1/4 inch to the pattern paper size. So if the pattern paper piece is 2.5 by 3.5, then I would go 2 3/4 by 3 3/4 on my mat size. So I just add an extra 1/4 inch, and it just creates a nice little border around the pattern paper. So this time I have a bird that I stamped on some off-white cardstock, die cut it into a circle, and am adding it to a kind of doily die cut that I did out of the same blue that is my card mat. And then I have my sentiment and also have it on off-white cardstock and adding it to blue cardstock again, just so it stands out a little bit better. The sentiment I'm using on this one is wishing you comfort and peace. So that is how that card turned out. Moving on to sketch B. It's a horizontal orientation, and I have the strip that's going directly onto my card base behind that big rectangle is that off-white background again. So I'm going to use my blue marker and add it just to the top and bottom edges so that it stands out against that card base. You could use ink here if you wanted. I just happen to have a navy marker in my drawer next to me. So then I will add that down to my card base. And then I do end up having to trim one end off my Card base was just shy of 5.5 inches wide. So I trimmed that down and then can adhere this rectangle. Now the rectangle, it didn't necessarily need anything to help it stand out from the cream or the off-white background. So I can just put it straight down. So then we have these little bitty strips that we cut, and I'm just going to cut at an angle on one end so you can kind of see what I did there, and it creates just a little angled banner, and I'm going to add that to the top right corner of this rectangle. And then my sentiment this time is thinking of you, and I'm going to add that kind of to the bottom left of the rectangle. You could add embellishments here, like I may come back at some point and add an embellishment on there, but for now we're going to call it okay. So for the second variation on sketch B, I'm going to be using a card mat. So I'm going to take that strip that goes that thin strip and go ahead and add it directly to my card mat. I am going to have to trim it down again because my mat is 5 3/8 by 4 1/8, and that strip was cut down to 5.5 inches to fit the card base. And then my pattern that I'm using for that rectangle was directional, and the flowers are facing up. So I'm going to turn this second variation, I'm also going to vary it by making it a vertical card instead of horizontal. So this is something you can do if you're using directional paper. Even though I tell you which direction the paper will go on the card when you're cutting it, you can't always, make it work. Like there's going to be patterns, there's going to be part of the paper that's going to be maybe the wrong orientation. So this is one way to work with that. It's just to change the orientation of the card. I'm still following the general sketch. I just turned it, 180 degrees, and I turned it 90 degrees and I'm, working with it this way. I have my sentiment that says prayers and hugs. I backed it on some navy cardstock again so that it will stand out. And then I've got my flag up there in the top right. I decided this time, since the background was so light, that I wanted to add something here. So I just have this die cut heart from some of that blue cardstock that I'm going to embellish with. Sketch C is another vertical card. So there's a strip that goes across the card base, and then that rectangular piece, which is your focal point. And then there's this little strip that I suggest going ahead and gluing to the rectangular focal point piece first, just in case you need to trim anything. Sometimes if some cuts are more generous than others, and you may need to either trim down the rectangle piece to fit the strip or trim the strip to fit the rectangle, if that makes sense. And then this time, in order to add some color to the edges, I am bringing in the Faded Denim Distress Oxide ink, just to kind of show you something else that you can do if you don't want to use cardstock. And then can add that down. If you are bringing in cardstock mats, please note that you will have scraps left over. I am not guaranteeing you no scraps on anything except the pattern paper. That's what I give you cutting guides for, so I know that you can make these 12 cards with no scraps of pattern paper left. But if you bring in cardstock for some matting layers, you most likely will have scraps left. And so ways that you can use that are to add it to the inside of your cards, use it for additional matting layers, add it as layers to behind your focal points or sentiments to create dimension. So here I used a little die cut butterfly, and then the sentiment that I stamped directly onto my card base with my stamping platform is Happy Mother's Day. I switched it up a little bit. Went with Happy Mother's Day this time instead of a, thinking of you kind of sentiment. Unfortunately, I need some sympathy cards, so that's kind of what some of these are geared for, or just general, like, you're in my thoughts kind of sentiments too. So I'm going to I brought in a red card mat this time, still 5 3/8 by 4 1/8. And then I added a mat behind that rectangular piece. Again, I added a 1/4 inch to the pattern paper piece dimensions and can layer all this together. And then my sentiment on this one is just with deepest sympathy. And then I do have a little die cut scallop heart that I'm going to add as an embellishment. So those are sketch C. So I have these two little strips of pattern paper left that were part of the cutting guide. And what you can do with these is add these to the inside of your card. So I'll show you one, like how I would use it. And then because I did use some cardstock mats, I did have some scraps left over. So you can use these the same way as you would that pattern paper. Just add it to the inside of your card. You could die cut some additional shapes for embellishments out of it as well.
So here are my 12 cards, and I just wanted to give you some additional ideas on maybe separating if you were like me and had a pattern that had a background that was very similar to what the card base was. You know, I used ink marker to add color to the edges of mine. You could also, if you don't want to use cardstock or don't have cardstock, you could use Love from Lizzie strips. I did that on one of my test sets here, and on sketch B, I added the Lizzie strips just to the strip that goes behind, just to separate it from the card mat. Here I used it on the strip that goes behind, this is sketch C, and I used it to separate this little strip that comes down on that focal rectangle. You could also use border strips or real thin pieces of cardstock if you wanted. You know, whatever you have, whatever it is that you are, whatever look it is that you are trying to go for, but just hopefully you got some ideas on variations. My sketch sets are meant to be jumping off points, so you can keep them simple as the sketches are, or you can make them as embellished or detailed as you want. So these are meant to be able to be used by beginning card makers through experienced card makers. So anyway, hope you guys got some ideas and variations, but please be sure to check the description box for the link to the free PDF and to Sarah's channel so you can see what she made for bringing back Basic Gray. But as always, I thank you all so very much for your time and hope you all have a very crafty day.